On this Monday night, military money, Canada's bold pledge to hit NATO spending targets sooner.
If we want a more reliable world, we need a stronger Canada.
The government's plan to cough up the cash and rely less on the U.S. Angry protests in Los Angeles over immigration raids.
They're bad people.
The battle brewing between President Trump and California officials. The Competition Bureau delivers a lawsuit to DoorDash. Why the company is accused of misleading customers. Plus, an extraordinary Nova Scotia teenager's fighting spirit and advocacy.
People with disabilities are contributors to society. We are just regular people.
One recipient of this year's prestigious Terry Fox Humanitarian Award.
Global National with Donna Friesen.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. The Prime Minister is promising the biggest increase in Canada's defence spending in decades, calling the world dangerous and divided. Mark Carney now says Canada will reach the NATO target of 2% of GDP spent on defence by the end of this year, and will do it by reducing our dependence on the U.S.
As the world grows more dangerous, we will secure Canada. And through these efforts, we will also create tens of thousands of high-paying jobs right here at home.
At the same time, the head of NATO warning that Russia has teamed up with China, North Korea and Iran and says they are ramping up their military capabilities fast.
In terms of ammunition, Russia produces in 3 months what the whole of NATO produces in a year. And its defense industrial base is expected to roll out 1,500 tanks, 3,000 armored vehicles, and 200 Iskander missiles this year alone. Russia could be ready to use military force against NATO within 5 years.
Mackenzie Gray has our top story tonight.
All right, we're gonna plan a deployment here.
Getting Canada deployment ready is at the heart of Mark Carney's latest promise.
Canada will achieve NATO's 2% of GDP target this year, half a decade ahead of schedule.
To meet the military alliance's baseline, the Prime Minister promising $9.3 billion in new spending, which includes $2 billion to diversify away from the Americans, a part of a shifting geopolitical landscape.
The long-held view that Canada's geographic location will protect us is becoming increasingly archaic. More broadly, we're too reliant on the United States.
A reliance that has been a common complaint from Washington.
They don't pay very much for military, and the reason they don't pay much is they assume that we're going to protect them. That's not an assumption they can make.
The president's frequent attacks loom over negotiations between Canada and the U.S. on a new security and economic agreement. But Carney dismissed that was behind the sudden spending spree, despite previously saying NATO's target was an arbitrary figure.
Our fundamental goal in all of this is to protect Canadians, not to satisfy NATO accountants.
The plan also earmarks $2.6 billion to boost recruitment and give current CAF members a raise, as well as $2.1 billion to ramp up domestic military production. But executing the new spending will be key.
I'm very pleased with what I heard today, but it's all about the follow through. It's about getting the decisions and moving forward.
In total, defense spending will be $62.7 billion this fiscal year, but that's not good enough for the head of NATO, who wants it increased to 5% of GDP.
This is one of the big issues we have, that when it comes to defense spending, there is an issue with Europe and Canada.
If Canada hits the new target, it would cost an additional $93.7 billion a year, more than Ottawa spends on elderly benefits, its largest single expense, Donna, and it's a conversation Carney will continue to have in 2 weeks at NATO's annual summit in the Netherlands.
Okay, Mackenzie, thanks. Our Ottawa Bureau Chief Mercedes Stevenson is with me now. Mercedes, this is a big financial commitment to defense. The Prime Minister has acknowledged the scale of the challenge, but I guess there'll have to be trade-offs. Where is he going to come up with the money?
Great question, Donna. The Prime Minister said the increased defense spending will come with, quote, sacrifice, which means there are other programs or spending that he will have to cut. What we don't know is which programs or which spending that might be yet. But senior Liberals around Mark Carney say he has no plans to spend recklessly, which means they have to find balance somewhere. A senior source that I spoke to said that this decision to suddenly spend much more rapidly than initially promised came because Prime Minister Carney was fully briefed on the state of the Canadian military and Canada's national national security requirements, which have been underfunded and under-resourced for decades. The biggest challenge, though, for the government here is the how. The military has been unable to spend the inadequate sums of money it receives due to administrative and bureaucratic inefficiencies and sclerosis so far. So whether or not Mr. Carney will be able to succeed in spending that full amount is a question, but there's no doubt that either way, this news at least will be well received by our allies at both the G7 and NATO summits later this month.
And Mercedes Canada, of course, depends heavily on the U.S. for defense and for supplying our military. The Prime Minister wants to change that and spend money on domestic manufacturing, plus from other allies. How realistic is that?
It can be done, Donna, but it will require a tectonic shift for the government away from short-term boom and bust investments in individual defense projects to a long-term strategic investment. One source told me that will be revealed in a coming industrial strategy, which will incorporate defense procurement as part of that major policy shift. To create a legitimate defense industrial base, the government will have to invest over not just years, but decades to create a stable business environment in Canada and find partners in our allies that will buy that equipment, because the Canadian military alone is simply not big enough to sustain that kind of massive industry. But tonight, Canadian industry says they are hopeful.
Okay, Mercedes Stevenson in Ottawa, thank you. The guest list for the G7 in Alberta next week keeps expanding. The Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has now been invited. It's not known if Mohammed bin Salman will make the trip to Kananaskis. Saudi Arabia is not a G7 member, but the oil-rich country is seen as a key player in the peace process, such as it is between Israel and Gaza. Mexico's President Claudia Sheinbaum confirmed today she will make the trip. Mexico isn't a G7 member either, but Sheinbaum is hoping to meet with the U.S. president. U.S. Marines are now being mobilized in Los Angeles by President Trump after an ugly night of vandalism and unrest. People are angry about federal immigration agents, known as ICE, carrying out raids across the city. Demonstrations so far have been peaceful. Today, a stark contrast to the clashes seen in the past few days. President Trump calls the protesters insurrectionists. He's defending his decision to send thousands of National Guard forces, bypassing California's governor, who is now suing the Trump administration. Jackson Proskow reports on the politics behind the escalating crisis.
This is the showdown the White House has been waiting for. Violent clashes and mass protests over immigration raids. A pretext for President Donald Trump to federalize the National Guard and deploy troops on U.S. soil.
The people that are causing the problem are professional agitators, they're insurrectionists, they're bad people, they should be in jail.
By branding protesters as insurrectionists, Trump is opening the door to further expanding his domestic use of the military. For now, he says, there are no such plans.
It was heading in the wrong direction. It's now heading in the right direction.
The history of this country is that protest is a core protected activity, that the military is about fighting our enemies, not fighting within.
As skirmishes have intensified in Los Angeles, local officials have accused Trump of pouring gasoline on the fire, inflaming tensions by sending in troops they do not need or want.
We could handle this. I believe that we would have gone through a number of steps before we'd have deployed the National Guard or requested deployment of the National Guard.
The back and forth between California and the White House has included vague threats to arrest local officials, including the governor.
He made this up. This is a manufactured crisis.
Trump said Gavin Newsom should be arrested without specifying a crime.
But I think it would be a great thing. He's done a terrible job.
If the goal is to dial back tensions, Trump's strongman tactics have instead raised nationwide alarm.
Enough is enough!
At a rally outside the Justice Department in Washington, marchers vowed to press on and keep fighting mass immigration raids.
We are going to stand united against this authoritarian power grab.
California is now suing the Trump administration over the deployment of the National Guard, claiming a violation of state sovereignty. The suit asks a judge to declare the deployment illegal and pull the troops off the streets. Donna?
All right, Jackson Proskow in Washington, thank you. Danya Bacchus from CBS News is in Los Angeles. Danya, what is happening where you are and what's expected there later tonight?
You know, what we have seen since we've been out here are dozens of protesters who have been peaceful throughout the day. I'm just going to kind of step out and ask my photographer if he can kind of zoom in here. We're not going to zoom in too much because there is some pretty graphic language sometimes sprayed on graffiti on the walls here and also on the protester signs. But this is what we've seen all day. Pretty much people just standing here in front of a police barricade, sometimes chanting National Guard has got to go, sometimes chanting shame, shame as law enforcement passes by or even tries to go through. Like I said, there is a police barricade here, and behind the police officers are National Guard troops. They are kind of in the distance. What we've seen throughout downtown Los Angeles is plenty of law enforcement presence again, from National Guard troops to local law enforcement. We've even seen the California Highway Patrol, many of them, of course, in tactical gear, ready for something to happen, but that just has not been the case today. We're not really sure what's going to happen tonight. Now, we do know sometimes that what we have seen is during the day you do have peaceful protesters like this one, and of course as night falls other people start to come out and the protests can get a little bit more rowdy, a little bit more violent. So I'm sure that law enforcement is prepared for that. Of course, that's why there are so many here and the presence is here. But also want to put into context that this is only happening in a handful of places throughout Los Angeles. I think sometimes when we see things, we're reporting on things, it can seem as if the entire city, is undergoing these type of protests. What we see here, like I said, dozens of people, maybe a couple of other places in Los Angeles. This is what we've seen today, which is relatively peaceful protests.
Okay, we appreciate that. Donya Bacchus in Los Angeles tonight. Thanks. Now to the wildfires in Canada. Above average temperatures in BC have prompted a warning.
We often look to June rains as an indicator of how severe our wildfire season will be. And although it's still early, models are showing that much of the province is trending towards warm and dry conditions. And so we may not get the precipitation we're hoping for.
More than 200 wildfires are burning across Canada right now. And in Manitoba, where 21,000 people are still out of their homes, tourists have been asked to stay away in order to make room for evacuees.
The government anticipates there may be a need for more hotel rooms. For that reason, we are urging Manitobans and Canadians to reconsider non-essential travel and event plans within Manitoba.
There are 28 active wildfires across Manitoba, 10 out of control. The largest blaze near Flin Flon is estimated to be over 3,700 hectares. Ukraine says Russia has launched its biggest drone attack yet. At least one person was killed. Ukraine says it intercepted and destroyed 296 drones and missiles. Russia is escalating its attacks, ignoring pressure to agree on a ceasefire. Israel's military has intercepted a vessel bound for Gaza that was carrying aid and activists. The boat left Sicily just over a week ago. Israel seized it in international waters about 200 kilometers off Gaza's coast. The 12-member crew includes climate activist Greta Thunberg. They're now in custody. Redmond Shannon reports on what they were attempting to do.
They did say that they want to intercept us in a very calm way, but this is not what's happening.
The overnight interception that all 12 crew on the Madeleine were fully expecting.
Right now they're jamming our comms.
Israeli forces approached the Freedom Flotilla coalition ship, bombarding it with lights, noises and an unknown substance.
Phones need to go.
A crew member tells everyone to ditch their phones into the water.
Calm down, calm down.
If you see this video, we have been intercepted and kidnapped in international waters by the Israeli occupational forces.
Climate activist Greta Thunberg is by far the most prominent member of a crew that said it wanted to highlight the aid blockade on Gaza. Israel's foreign ministry released this photo of her as the crew and ship were brought to an Israeli port on Monday. Israel's defense minister called her an anti-Semite and said the crew will be made watch a graphic video of the October 7th attacks.
The selfie yacht had a really meagre cargo,
much less than even a truck's worth of aid.
A government spokesperson singled out Thunberg too.
And she's not here for Gaza, let's be blunt about it. She's here for Greta.
Her presence, though, meant the world was watching closely. Last month, another of the group's ships was bombed near Malta. Israel has not commented on that. 15 years ago, Israeli commandos killed 10 Turkish activists on a much larger aid ship bound for Gaza. The head of Amnesty International said Monday's interception violates international law. Israel says all crew members will be deported to their home countries. Donna?
Okay, Redmond Shannon in London, thank you. The Hockey Canada sex assault trial coming up, closing arguments after 6 weeks of testimony. Closing arguments began today in the trial of 5 former members of Canada's World Junior Hockey team. They're accused of sexually assaulting a woman in a hotel room in 2018. All have pleaded not guilty. Lawyers for each defendant will now make their final submissions. Sean O'Shea has been following the case and was in court today. Sean.
After 6 weeks of testimony in this unusual trial, which included 1 mistrial and the dismissal of 1 jury, final arguments are underway. The 5 hockey players, each charged with sexual assault, have pleaded not guilty. Supporters of the female complainant showed up with signs to show solidarity with the woman we can only refer to as EM because of a court publication ban. The 5 players, Michael McLeod, Alex Formanton, Dylan Dubé, Carter Hart and Cal Foote, arrived separately and walked past demonstrators. Across the street, a lone demonstrator held a sign questioning the charges laid after events in a second-floor room at a London hotel in June of 2018. EM testified she met McLeod at a local bar, got drunk, and went with him voluntarily to the hotel. She testified she did not consent to group sex with the men after McLeod invited other hockey players to come join in. McLeod's lawyer cast doubt on EM's testimony, which stretched on for 9 days. He claimed EM was a flawed witness with an unreliable version of events. David Humphrey told the judge, this is a case where the defense has an embarrassment of riches, a cornucopia of compelling credibility and reliability concerns in EM's testimony. Arguing it was EM who chose to abandon restraint, saying she was a willing and enthusiastic participant in the drinking and dancing, adding she was a fully consenting participant in the sexual action that followed. Humphrey defended McLeod's actions to obtain what appeared to be a consent video in the early morning hours, saying that turned out to be a good idea. Some who work with survivors of sexual violence say this case is being watched closely by victims.
That's part of the danger in this case, that many survivors who are watching and witnessing this case might be hesitant to come forward because they don't know if they're going to be believed.
5 defense lawyers will address the judge before the Crown Attorney presents her final remarks. Because there's no longer a jury in this case, Ontario Superior Court Justice Maria Caracia will decide the men's fate herself. The verdict may not come, though, until July or August. Donna.
All right, Sean O'Shea in London, Ontario. Thanks. Taking flight ahead, what this zebra got caught up in that landed him up here. Canada's Competition Bureau is suing DoorDash and its Canadian subsidiary, accusing them of advertising deceptive prices and discounts. The investigation found customers were unable to buy items at the advertised prices because mandatory service and delivery fees were added at checkout. The Bureau is now seeking legal action for DoorDash to pay a penalty and compensate affected consumers. DoorDash denies the allegations.
There's a zebra in a bag.
This zebra's quest for freedom is over. The zebra named Ed was acquired as a pet in Tennessee, where owning a pet zebra is legal. Ed escaped less than a day after he arrived and was on the loose for more than a week, creating quite a spectacle until authorities caught him in a pasture and then airlifted him to an animal trailer. The whole thing has ignited a debate about the regulation of exotic pet ownership. Next, how this Nova Scotia teen embodies Terry Fox's determination and courage. Sly Sly Stone, frontman of the pioneering funk band Sly and the Family Stone, has died from complications of lung disease. His family says he was surrounded by his children, friends, and extended family. His hits included Everyday People and Dance to the Music, and his band played a pivotal role in establishing the psychedelic sounds of 1970s funk music. Sly Stone was 82 years old. This year marks the 45th anniversary of the Terry Fox Marathon of Hope. The 18-year-old from Port Coquitlam, BC, ran across Canada to raise money for cancer research, and his legacy lives on. The Terry Fox Humanitarian Award is given to young Canadians who exemplify Terry's courage and determination. Heidi Petrachik introduces us to one of this year's recipients.
In some ways, Van Bernard is a typical teenager.
There we go, latched. Go ahead.
But in many ways, he's also extraordinary, defying the diagnosis he received at just 10 months old of spinal muscular atrophy type 2, a degenerative condition which makes his muscles extremely weak.
The doctors prepared us that he wouldn't live past 2 years. And now he's graduating high school. We are so blessed. Now you have to work on your speech. I do.
Now prepping not only for final exams, but graduation day as class valedictorian.
I think I'm going to write a lot about perspective. You can always look at things in two different ways. So is the glass half empty or half full?
The 17-year-old considers his glass half full, an example of what's possible.
Hi, my name is Van Bernard, and I'm 6 years old.
Nova Scotians know him well. 11 years ago, his family took to social media to fundraise for a wheelchair-accessible van. The campaign and Van's precocious personality went viral. They raised enough to buy the van for Van, and Van has used his voice to advocate for accessibility, inclusivity, and diversity ever since.
Advocacy is so important. We often get treated differently, whether it's somebody talking to me like a baby or it's somebody not talking to me at all.
He's now being recognized with a Terry Fox Humanitarian Award for his courage and determination.
In this time where people are often thinking, oh, the world's headed in the wrong direction, there's actually people that are working in the other direction and can provide us with that inspiration.
People with disabilities are contributors to society. We might come in different ways, shapes, or forms, and that's totally okay.
Van heads to Ottawa next week for the official award event, just 10 days before his high school grad. His next stop is university this fall. Heidi Petrachik, Global News, Hammonds Plains, Nova Scotia.
So well deserved. That is Global National for this Monday. I'm Donna Friesen. Tonight's here in Canada is Fredericton, Bowen Island, BC, and Pine Lake Camp near Red Deer, Alberta. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.